Trading psychology is not a side topic. It is the battlefield itself, because every strategy you will ever use ultimately has to pass through your own mind before it reaches the market. And that mind carries fear, greed, ego, impatience, and doubt long before it carries logic. I didn't learn this from books or seminars. I learned it the expensive way across decades, across cycles, across moments where my analysis was right, but my behavior was wrong, and the market punished behavior every single time without exception. Your inner demons don't disappear. As you gain experience, they simply get more sophisticated, and if you don't learn how to recognize them, they will quietly sabotage you while convincing you that you're being rational. Early in my career, I believed psychology only mattered when things were going badly. If I could just find the right system, the right indicators, the right edge, psychology would take care of itself. That illusion lasted until my first real winning streak. That's when the most dangerous demons showed up, not fear, but overconfidence and entitlement. I started to believe I had figured something out, that the market was finally rewarding my intelligence. My risk crept up slowly. My patience thinned. I broke rules in small ways because I was in sync. The losses that followed felt unfair, not because they were large, but because I felt betrayed. That sense of betrayal was the clearest signal that ego had taken control long before the market turned. Fear is the most obvious demon, but it is rarely the most destructive. Fear whispers when you are wrong, telling you to freeze, to delay, to hope. It shows up as moving stops, as hesitation, as the refusal to accept a small loss that later becomes a large one. I've watched fear disguise itself as prudence for years. I'll give it a little more room. The level is still intact. The fundamentals haven't changed. All reasonable words, all spoken by fear, trying to avoid emotional pain. The market doesn't care why you hesitate. It only records that you did. Greed is quieter and far more persuasive. Greed doesn't shout at reasons. It tells you this time is different, that holding just a bit longer is discipline, not desire. It turns unrealized profit into imagined ownership. Once you feel you own a gain, you stop managing it and start defending it. That's when exits get delayed, targets get stretched, and good trades quietly turn into regrets. Greed doesn't feel reckless. It feels justified, and that's why it's so dangerous. Then there is impatience, the demon that thrives in boredom. Impatience convinces you that doing nothing is falling behind. It pushes you into marginal trades just to feel involved. In slow markets, impatience is responsible for more losses than bad analysis ever will. I learned this during long-range bound periods when nothing worked cleanly. My edge hadn't disappeared, but my tolerance for waiting had. I traded to escape discomfort, not to exploit opportunity, and the market charged me accordingly. Revenge is what happens when several demons combine. After a loss, your identity feels threatened. You don't just want money back, you want relief. You want to erase the feeling of being wrong. Revenge trading feels urgent, emotional, and oddly focused. It narrows your vision. Risk explodes. Logic disappears. Every experienced trader knows this state, even if they don't like to admit it. The difference between survivors and casualties is not who feels revenge, but who has rules strong enough to stop them from acting on it. One of the hardest truths I ever accepted is that these demons never leave. You don't conquer them once and move on. You learn to recognize their voices and limit their influence. Trading psychology is not about becoming fearless or emotionless. It's about building structures that assume emotion will show up at the worst possible time and protect you anyway. Willpower is unreliable. Structure is not. During the 2008 crisis, this lesson became undeniable. Fear was everywhere. Markets were violent. Information was overwhelming. Traders who relied on intuition and courage alone were destroyed. Traders who relied on predefined risk, reduced size, and strict rules survived even if they were scared. Courage did not save accounts. Process did. That period burned one truth into me permanently. The goal is not to feel good while trading, it is to remain functional. Over time, I stopped trying to eliminate emotion and started trying to contain it. I accepted that if I felt excited, fearful, or desperate, that was information, not instruction. Those feelings told me something about my state, not about the market. The moment I learned to pause instead of act on them, my consistency improved. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. And steady is how you stay in this game long enough for skill to matter. As this begins to sink in, you realize that conquering your inner demons is not about fighting yourself. It's about understanding yourself deeply enough to stop letting impulses make decisions they were never qualified to make. And that understanding is only the first step, because awareness alone does not change behavior under pressure. And that is where we need to continue next, as we move from naming these psychological traps into building concrete habits, rules and environments that prevent fear, greed, impatience, and ego from hijacking execution when real money is at risk and the screen is flashing and the pressure feels immediate and personal, and you are standing right there at the edge of a decision that feels urgent but isn't. And that moment is where psychology either owns you or serves you. And that is exactly where we go next, as this sentence carries forward into how to build a mental framework that keeps you grounded when the demons speak loudest and makes discipline automatic rather than aspirational. And that continuation is where real transformation happens, and where trading psychology stops being theory and becomes survival by replacing intention with structure. Because intention collapses under pressure, while structure holds when emotion is loud and persuasive. The first and most important habit I ever built to deal with my inner demons was removing decision-making from moments of emotional intensity. Every major rule I follow today was designed at a time when I was calm, objective, and slightly humbled by experience, not in the heat of a live trade. Entry criteria, position size, maximum loss, profit-taking logic. All of it decided in advance, written down, and treated as non-negotiable. This is not rigidity, it is self-respect. You are protecting your future self from your present impulses, and that protection is the foundation of psychological resilience. The second habit was learning to pause automatically when emotions spike. I don't mean pausing to think, because thinking while emotional usually just produces better excuses. I mean physical pauses built into the process. Step away from the screen. Stand up. Breathe. Walk. These interruptions break the momentum of impulse. Fear, greed, and revenge thrive on speed. Slowing the body slows the mind. Over time, this pause became reflexive. The moment I felt urgency, not opportunity, I stepped back. Urgency is almost never a signal from the market. It is a signal from your nervous system. Another critical framework was redefining what emotions mean. Early on, I treated emotions as problems to eliminate. That never worked. Eventually, I learned to treat them as indicators. Excitement often meant I was sizing too large. Anxiety often meant uncertainty I hadn't fully acknowledged. Boredom often meant there was no edge present. Once emotions became information instead of commands, their power diminished. I didn't need to suppress them. I needed to listen without obeying. Journaling played a far bigger role than I ever expected. Not performance journaling, but psychological journaling. After trades, especially bad ones, I wrote down what I felt before, during, and after. Patterns emerged quickly. The same emotions preceded the same mistakes. The market didn't change. I did the same things in the same states. That awareness was uncomfortable, but it was liberating. You cannot manage what you refuse to see. Once the patterns were visible, rules could be built around them. Environment matters more than most traders admit. Who you listen to, how much noise you consume, how often you check prices. All of these influence psychology before you ever place a trade. I learned to reduce exposure deliberately. Fewer opinions, fewer alerts, less comparison. Comparison is fuel for ego and impatience. A clean mental environment makes discipline far easier than heroic willpower ever will. One of the most powerful shifts I made was changing how I measured success. I stopped asking whether I made money on a trade and started asking whether I respected my rules. This reconditioning was slow, but it changed everything. Cutting a loss cleanly became a win. Passing on a marginal setup became progress. Over time, my brain learned to associate pride with discipline rather than outcome. When that association changes, inner demons lose leverage because they thrive on outcome obsession. It's also essential to accept that psychological mastery is cyclical, not linear. There are periods when discipline feels effortless and periods when it feels fragile. That does not mean you are regressing. It means you are human. The goal is not permanent control, it is rapid recovery. How quickly do you recognize when emotion has taken over? How quickly do you reduce risk? How quickly do you step back? Speed of recovery matters far more than frequency of error. Looking back now, I can say this with clarity. The traders who last are not the ones with the strongest personalities, but the ones with the strongest systems for protecting themselves from their own personalities. Inner demons don't destroy accounts by force. They destroy them by persuasion. They sound reasonable. They sound confident. They sound familiar. Structure is what keeps you from listening too closely. And that is the real meaning of conquering your inner demons in trading. You don't defeat them in battle. You outgrow their authority. You build a process where they can speak, but they can no longer vote. If this lesson resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you can continue learning from real market experience rather than motivational slogans, and leave a comment sharing which inner demon challenges you. Most fear, greed, impatience, or ego, because naming it clearly is often the first step toward designing a structure strong enough to keep it from running your trading ever again.